Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith, and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. On this week's podcast, I have invited Joe Kaufman. Joe is the chairman and CEO of the Joe Kaufman Security Initiative, a nonprofit 501c3 dedicated to educating the public on issues concerning national security, counterterrorism, and the fight against bigotry. Joe is a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and a writer for the center's publication, FrontPage Magazine. Additionally, Joe writes for the Middle East Forum's focus on Western Islamism. Exactly 1 month prior to the 9/11 attacks, Joe predicted the attacks by stating in an article he had written that the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center was no aberration and that it would happen again. I also want to remind our audience that as PJTN Watchmen, it's your biblical duty to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can take action against the issues that threaten our republic and the state of Israel. So please remember to like and share. As it goes with Israel, so shall it go with the United States. So Joe, thank you so much for joining me on Proclaiming Justice.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you've got an amazing background, and it goes way back. I became familiar with your work after 9/11, and 9/11 was the impetus behind our organization, PJTN. I realized then that the same enemy attacking Israel had just come to our shores. Tell our audience about the investigation you conducted back then that led you to believe that another attack was imminent.
So to make a long story short, I was the editor of a newspaper called the Jewish Israeli Magazine. It's a South Florida-based newspaper, and it became Israel Post. So that was its new name. While being the editor, I was working with all Israelis, and the reason why I became editor was because their English wasn't so great, and the English section was suffering. I had been a writer for some years for the publication, so they had asked me to become the editor. Anyway, we started receiving emails about a large-scale attack that was going to happen inside the United States. This was roughly 5 months prior to 9/11. I didn't take it seriously at first, but after receiving a number of emails, I started doing my own research, and I wasn't really a researcher at the time, but I became one, and I was contacting people. If you know about Israel, so everybody in Israel is connected to the government, is connected to intelligence, is connected to the military. Everybody, most of them have to serve military service themselves. So everybody's there. It's a very small place, and everybody's connected. So I had some people to work off of with these things, and I had a fairly large email list, and I started sending out emails that may have sounded a little bit crazy, saying that there was going to be something happening inside the United States, and it was coming from the Middle East. I had information regarding Saudi Arabia and even Malaysia, and anyway. In the end, when it did take place, this was I'd written an article which you mentioned exactly 1 month prior to 9/11. I could state that the '93 bombings was not an aberration. I believe it was going to happen again. I didn't. I had no absolute information about that, but what information I had, I thought, something was going to happen, and I'm sure the U.S. government, had much more information. I know I made phone calls, and I'm not sure they took it serious what I was saying, but in the end, it did take place, and for months I was involved in this little Zionist group in Miami, actually chaired by them, the chief rabbi of Sicily, actually, and I was telling everybody, because everybody would talk about what terrorism was going on in Israel, and I kept on stressing that there was something going on inside the United States. But I don't know that anybody took it seriously, because really, since the '93 bombing of the World Trade Center, there was really nothing going on. Like overseas, there was this group Al Qaeda that was conducting some attacks, but really, that was overseas. Nothing really targeted the U.S. So right after 9/11, we had another meeting, and there was this woman named Bela Rabinowitz, who is the head of this thing called, today is the head of something called Militant Islam Monitor, and she used to just sit there quietly and listen to the speeches that everybody was making. And 2 weeks after 9/11, we had another meeting, and she came up to me and said, "Hey, I want to help you with this research. You've been asking people to do the research with you. I want to help you." That's how we started. I really, after 9/11, I devoted my life to this, and it's been nonstop since then.
Well, Americans owe you a debt of gratitude for the work that you did. Right after the day after 9/11, once the airspace had been shut down, because we were living in Nashville at the time, and the 12th Avenue Mosque in Nashville, downtown Nashville, there was a protege of the One-Eyed Sheikh that was the imam of the mosque on 12th Avenue. And I remember in the news, there was only one story and nothing else was said about it. But that imam was whisked out of Nashville to we don't know where. And then it was shortly thereafter, we heard about the one flight that was allowed to leave the Saudis, I guess it was, flight that was allowed to leave U.S. airspace. And I assumed that he was on that plane and he was out of here. But no, I mean, it rocked our world. This nation is not the same as a result of it. And now, we've all got to pay closer attention to what's going on. And it's interesting because over the last couple of years since COVID, it's like the activity has gone down under the radar, and there hasn't been much going on, but it seems like it's getting a little bit more active again. And I want to talk about the recent article that you broke about Naima Khan Ghani's appointments on Broward County Schools Diversity and Human Relations Committees, which was shocking, as she has made anti-Semitic comments and anti-Israel statements. But when I read your article and I saw her involvement with the Muslim Student Association, I was like, wait a minute, what the heck is she being appointed for? But tell us about the research that you did on Ghani.
So she created an apparatus for the Muslim Student Association for actually high schools and middle schools inside of South Florida. So and she became the advisor of these organizations. So she would hop around, I guess, to these high schools and middle schools, get young Muslims to create their own Muslim student associations, and then she would become the advisor for these organizations. So that was one thing, but she's been involved in so many of the organizations. The organization CARE, the Hamas linked group that has foundational and financial ties to CARE. In fact, here in South Florida, alone, the Florida chapter of CARE in 2014, they were co-sponsoring an event that took place in downtown Miami, where they repeatedly chanted, the crowd repeatedly chanted, "We are Hamas," and "Let's go Hamas." So it wasn't like getting involved in CARE Florida was not much different than getting involved in CARE National. Very similar attitudes towards terrorist organizations. She was involved in the organization Islamic Circle of North America. This organization has significant terrorist ties to South Asian terrorism. The organization has been harboring for over 3 decades a former death squad leader from the 1971 Bangladesh genocide, where upwards of 3 million individuals were murdered. This particular individual, Shillman Fellow, who's still involved with ICNA to this day, who lives in Queens, New York. This individual was not too long ago sentenced to death in absentia in Bangladesh, but for whatever reason, the U.S. government refuses to extradite this individual to face his justice in Bangladesh. This individual lives freely in Queens, New York. And you had mentioned before about the blind sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman from the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, the spiritual leader of that event, who was involved with the precursor to Al Qaeda. That individual as well harbored inside the United States. He was the one allegedly that wrote the fatwa for the murder of Anwar Sadat, the then head of Egypt, who had made peace with Israel. So as a result of his fatwa, Sadat was murdered. He was placed in prison. When he was released from prison, he fled the country and he came to the U.S. and he was allowed to create his own mosque in Jersey City. So he became the head of the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. It's possible that had he not been taken in to the United States, had he not been allowed to have the pleasure of the freedoms of the U.S. as we do as Americans, it's possible that maybe even 9/11 wouldn't have taken place. So that's just a major flaw in the U.S. that we allow people like this death squad leader in New York and this blind sheikh who's involved in a major terrorist attack in the U.S. to have safe harbor in the United States. These individuals should never be allowed in the U.S. So here's another group, this group, Islamic Circle of North America, that Kandani's involved with. And as well, she's involved with a number of other Islamist groups that we don't have to go into. But she on top of that, as you mentioned, she made a number of postings online, postings of videos of a known anti-Semite, Rick Wiles, postings herself about denying Israel's right to self-defense. She says it's an excuse that Israel uses, posting that Israel really should be destroyed from the river to the sea, as we keep on hearing from so many of these organizations. She posted that she wants the liberation of Palestine. We understand what that means. When you say you want the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, there's only one meaning for that, and that's the destruction of the Jewish state of Israel. And so the information regarding her was overwhelming, and I praise, and I know you did as well. I praised Dr. Jeff Holness because he didn't have to. He could have ignored it, like so many government representatives do. He could have ignored the situation and maybe even not suffer any consequences for ignoring it, because I know I do this over and over again with local and national representatives, and the vast majority of the time they do nothing. They ignore the situation, and and it doesn't harm them. It doesn't harm them politically. It doesn't harm them with votes or money or political power. But to Dr. Holmes's credit, he did the right thing, and that's what they all should do.
I
He
know.
removed this individual.
It was shocking. I was shocked to hear the news when because I had contacted the office to speak with him in my capacity as a district advisory council member for Broward County Schools. And he never returned my phone call. His assistant called me back requesting my email address that he was going to send a statement. So I thought, oh, he's bailing. I thought he's going to surrender. He's going to give us an excuse as to why. Well, when I read the statement, I was shocked because you're right. 9 times out of 10, when an elected official is confronted about an appointment, especially as controversial as this, they decide they dig in their heels and they don't care. It's alarming because, and I was very pleased at his decision, but it's alarming because Broward County has a large Jewish student body. It has a large Jewish community. And for him not to know what he was doing, but I noticed you also wrote something about his associations and his participation with some questionable characters. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, this was one of the reasons I was very surprised. First of all, I'm surprised that any government official would remove these individuals because, like I said, it's easier to ignore it than to do the right thing.
Right.
But the real thing I was surprised about is that the fact that he has been, and it was through her. To be honest, it was through her. He's been visiting all of these radical mosques and these different organizations like the Muslim Student Association, and it's all through Khan Ghani. And he's done the photo ops with her with the big smiles. And it's not just him. There's a little clique of politicians that's I guess part of his clique and part of what was her clique. I'm hoping they're not going to be involved with her any longer. Who would be part of these photo ops? Mm-hmm. And they post them happily on social media, which is how I found these things. So so again, it was surprising also because I'm sure, if I was in Dr. Holmes's place, there's a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation here.
Yeah.
If you need to do the right thing, or you and maybe divorce yourself from these groups, which he should do anyway. I mean, he should be speaking out against these organizations. He should be working towards shutting them down. But the reality is that never happens.
Right.
But instead, he could have ignored it, happily gone to all these radical mosques over and over again every year. And he may try to do so anyway. I'm not sure they'll have him anymore, but because he listened and he did the right thing. But who knows?
Right.
But he has been associating himself, and that was a big deal as well. And I saw also in his bio that he in the past was involved with the Anti-Defamation League. So maybe he really did care about that issue of not spreading anti-Semitism. And I'm not saying that ADL is perfect, but him having involvement with the group, maybe it did work on him to do the right thing, and not just to do the right thing for political purposes, but to do the right thing because it's wrong. And this woman was exposed, and maybe you didn't know these things in the past, and maybe all of a sudden you see it. Recently, and I had mentioned to you before the interview that this woman had been heavily or is heavily involved with this South Florida Muslim Federation. The federation is made up of all of the various radical Muslim groups in South Florida. There's like 40 organizations. And that includes the radical mosques and groups like CARE and all of those Islamist groups. But you had her involved with these organizations, and this particular group, the South Florida Muslim Federation, a short time ago, they had given awards to members of the Palm Beach School Board. The actual members, not people that sit on the committee, but the members. They had an awards ceremony, and they gave out 3 awards to 3 of the members, and I got involved, and I wrote a piece, and I made the phone calls and all of that. And one of the individuals, right after our article came out, and we had sent information to the members of the school board, all of the members of the school board, not just the 3 that received it, to maybe put some pressure or again see if they'll do the right thing. Well, sure enough, the vice chair of the school board had called my office right away. I mean, right away, and left a message saying that she will have nothing more to ever do with this South Florida Muslim Federation, and then we spoke the next day. We had a conference call with a number of people within my organization and her and others, and she said again, she said exactly the same. She said she'll have nothing to do with it. And she said she's going to give back the award, which was amazing. And she happened to be the vice chair. She happened to be the vice chairman of the school board. Now, of the other 2 that received the awards, one totally ignored the situation, and the other one doubled down on it, and to the point where she was even more, involved with the group, and said that she would remain so forever. But at least the leader or the vice chair did the right thing again. Whether it cost her politically or not, she did the right thing, and that's something to be proud of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and what you've done is something to be proud of. I mean, this is a growing problem in communities across the country, and I had no idea that it was going on in South Florida. I mean, I knew there was some questionable activity going on. I know that there's been some, and this is kind of just off the not off the record, but it doesn't have anything to do that I know of with this whole situation with Ghani. But I understand that there's been a bit of a brouhaha in Cooper City over the Islamic Center there because they're expanding their facility, and the people in the community, the neighbors around the facility, are up in arms. Is she tied to this group? Because I find it interesting that she's gone. There's been no outcry from the Muslim community, at least not publicly that we know of.
That organization, Nurul Islam in Cooper City, and I'll just mention regarding that group, the way back when, like over 20 years ago, shortly after 9/11, when I was well into my work, I got a phone call from someone who said that he was a member of the mosque, Nurul Islam, and that he and his mother wanted to meet with me. He said they're both members, and they wanted to get me information about the imam of the mosque. They said that prior to 9/11, this imam had a framed picture in his office of Osama bin Laden. We're talking about in the mosque office. This is the same place that they gave the extension to. So I had a whole bunch of other research on this mosque, and I sent it to all of the commissioners and the mayor Greg Ross, and who I think is Jewish. That's what I've been told, at least. but this was definitely a case where their entire group has totally ignored it, and they did, and they expanded the children's school there. And I'll tell you, on the children's school's website, it's on their website. People can see on the homepage of the children's school's website. They had a link to something called Islam Way, which was in court in the United States, for being, I believe it was Islam Way. I have to check. But they had a link to one of the websites that there was a court case going on where they were using the website to raise money for Hamas. Specifically from the website, they were telling people to donate money to Hamas and as well to commit violent jihad. And this was right on the homepage of the children's school website. So here they've given the green light to, and I also showed how it wasn't just back then, how they're doing it today, how they're bringing in all of the radical Muslim organizations still to this day, raising money for these groups. But it didn't matter because these commissioners, they and the mayor, they've totally ignored the situation, and I could only hope that they're voted out of office by the people, because it's true, like you said, the town was upset at the fact that they were giving this expansion, and they came out in numbers to speak out about it. But unfortunately, it didn't do anything for the city leaders, because they totally ignored what was being said, and they gave them this expansion of both the mosque and the children's school. And yes, it's true. It's not just in Brevard County. Really, if you go to any major city in the United States, this same thing is playing out. It's just that, I'm in Broward County, and I focused on the state of Florida, but if you put Joe Kaufman in every major city in every state, you'll see the same exact thing going on. And for some reason, the politicians just, again, money, power, votes, whatever it is, thinking that this constituency is gonna help them get elected or reelected. I know that's what's going on in Broward. It's going on all over the country, and these groups are getting money from the country. This Islamic Circle of North America I mentioned to you, that's harboring a death squad leader that's promoted an organization called Lashkar-e-Taiba, a front for Lashkar-e-Taiba overseas. That's the group that murdered those people in that Jewish center in Mumbai, India. This group does events with this organization, promotes this organization on the web. So, but that organization itself, it gets literally millions of dollars every year from the federal government, and it doesn't matter whether it's President Biden in office or President Trump or President Obama. They're still getting this money from the U.S. government through FEMA, through Homeland Security. They're getting millions of dollars, and I know that a lot of that money is not traceable. And what they do with the money is, and I've documented it, they partner, because they're involved with these groups in South Asia, to the point where they're really the same organization as Jamaat-e-Islami in South Asia, the largest Islamist organization in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. They partner with the main charity of that group, Al-Khidmat Foundation, And this Al
Mm-hmm.
Khidmat Foundation in Pakistan, Pakistan doesn't have the same laws as the United States. So if you give money, if you're a donor to a Pakistani charity, and that Pakistani charity wants to give money to Hamas, which they do,
Right.
they're on record of giving that money. It's not illegal for that Pakistani charity, and it's not illegal as well for an American charity to work with that Pakistani charity who voluntarily and happily is a donor to Hamas. It's only illegal if the American group does it, straight from the United States. But if they have a third party that's willing to do it, then they can get away with that, and that's what's been going on. And unfortunately, like I said, that definitely gets millions of dollars from the American taxpayer every year, and they continue to partner. It's right on those groups' websites. They continue to partner with that same Hamas financier, and the U.S. government. Like I said, it doesn't matter who's president, whether it's a conservative government or a liberal government. They're getting away with murder, literally.
Yeah.
And nobody's doing a damn thing about it.
Well, that's why you're doing what you're doing, to try to sound the alarm, to wake people up. Back in 2010, when we took on the mosque in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, we had I had done some research on the board members, and this ties into what you were saying about, the different groups and individuals that are involved. But there were 2 board members who were tied to Hamas in the mosque, the current mosque at the time, before they even built the 10,000 square foot facility. They only had a facility that was 1,500 square feet. They had 25 members, and they wanted to build a 52,000 square foot facility to reach the 10 counties around Murfreesboro. There were no Muslims in those counties. It was like, it was a drop in the bucket. They were planning something. They were planning to make this place like a center place in Tennessee, because it was in the center. It's actually right dead in the center of Tennessee. But anyhow, we exposed the 2 members of Hamas that were on the board. One of them was actively recruiting Muslims to kill Jews on his MySpace page. He wasn't even afraid to hide it. He just put it out there. And so when we found that, we found citizens that would be plaintiffs. We pulled 2 attorneys together and went after them. And the Chancery Court judge, after hearing all the evidence, ruled in the favor of the plaintiffs, because they had not been properly noticed. And unfortunately, a higher court judge, as we see happen all the time, came in and shot down his decision. But the judge that presided over the case, over the hearings, agreed with us that this was problematic, that the people were not properly noticed, and they needed to go back to square one and go through the whole process again. Well, that got shut down. So anyhow,
I don't remember the specifics of that case, but I would say that if you're creating, and I remember I remember seeing council meetings where people in the crowd were speaking out, just like in in the case I mentioned, there were people speaking out. But one thing I know is that usually, and that could have been the case then, if they had 25 members, they were probably trying to show how they would create this big center, because they know that there's going to be a lot more members than that. And one thing regarding, like, Nima Khanzani herself, why did she join these committees? What was her interest in joining the committees for the Broward County School Board? She joined the Diversity Committee and the Human Relations Committee, and she, in the end, when she was taken off, supposedly as of like July 1st, she's going to be totally removed, and now it looks like she's been suspended till then. But one of those committees, the Human Relations Committee, she's the chairperson, and on the other committee, she also held at some point the leadership position with the Diversity Committee. But the reason why she wanted to be on those committees was because she was pushing for the day off. She wanted a day off on the on the school calendar, on the public school calendar, a day off for Muslims for Ramadan, because Jews get off and Christians get off, so why not Muslims get off a day for Ramadan? But the sinister thing about that, and I don't begrudge Muslims for wanting a day off, but the sinister thing about that was that the organizations like CARE and this group Engage that works with basically the Democratic Party to bring the Islamist groups closer with people in public office, usually Democrats. The people involved with Engage have work with the Democratic Party, but the thing about it was that the groups that were involved in it, with Khan Ghani sitting on these committees in the school board pushing it along, the groups who were involved, they were pushing false numbers. So they were inflating the population of Muslims and Muslim school children throughout all three counties, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade, to huge numbers. They made it seem like such a gigantic community. I'm not going to say that the Muslim community is small over here, but there's legitimate organizations that put out statistics, population statistics, and they were going 10 times those numbers, and they were even going more than 10 times the numbers of former CARE officials that put out their own numbers in the past. So it was just absurd. But unfortunately, Broward County, and I believe Miami-Dade as well, fell for it, and they took these groups connected to terrorism and to all this extremism that goes on. They took these groups' word for it, and they put it on the calendar. And again, I'm not to say that they shouldn't have a day off, but the fact that they had to lie about statistics in order to get it there was sinister. And Khan Ghani was pushing all that along, and she was involved with those organizations herself. So she was helping to push these false statistics in order to get something done. And I think it's probably the same for the mosque in Tennessee. They probably said, hey, we're going to have a gigantic crowd coming. There's a giant Muslim population, even though we may have 25 members. There's a giant Muslim population in the surrounding cities and counties, and we're going to cater to them. And so we're going to build a gigantic mosque in order to fill that. And unfortunately, like I said, it's going on all around the country.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Joe, this has been amazing and so informative. In closing, are there any final comments you would like to share with our audience, and how can they get involved or follow your work?
I would say to the audience, one phone call, one appearance, one email can move mountains. One individual can move mountains. In the case of Khan Ghani, there was a parent that contacted me, and she wrote a letter to the school board members and to Homeless, discussing all of these different things. And in the end, I think that had, and there were phone calls as well. People made phone calls, but in the end, I think that had a tremendous effect. Just one individual can have a tremendous effect.
Right.
There are so many things. Once, way back when, Barbara Boxer, one of the most liberal members of the U.S. Senate, had given an award to a leader of CARE, and all I did was I called her office and I sent her staff information about CARE and information about the individual. His name was Bassem El-Kara, and she removed the award. She rescinded the award. And I'm sure she's not the person you would think would ever do something like that. But it was all from a phone call that I had made. So any of your listeners, if you think it's hopeless, it's not. One individual can do so much.
That's right. Absolutely. And Joe, thank you for informing our audience and all the work that you do. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found this program informative. We're going to post this on our podcast and website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Nazi threat that is destroying this nation and other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman, that the watchman, when he sees the enemy advancing, has a duty to warn the inhabitants of the city so that no innocent blood would be shed. But if the watchman doesn't warn the inhabitants and innocent blood is shed, it's going to be required of the watchman. But if the watchman sounds the alarm and the people in the city refuse to heed the warning, then if there or any innocent blood is shed, it's going to be required of them. You, ladies and gentlemen, you can sound the alarm and warn others by simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends. So please share and like this podcast to help sound the alarm in your community. I'm reminded of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who said, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." Don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism, taking back local control of our communities, and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this mission through our award-winning documentaries and Focus on Israel programs, as well as more programs like this for just $20 a month. So go to our website at pjtn.org to watch our programs and listen to our past podcasts. Real quick, Joe, one more time, can you give our audience an email address or a website that they can go to sign up to get on your mailing list?
Sure. Just go to kaufmansecurity.org. That's KAUFMAN, 1F1N, kaufmansecurity.org. And go to the contact if you'd like to get in touch with us, if you'd like to get involved. And our phone number and email are on there as well. So thank
Fantastic.
you so much.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Joe. I hope you all will prayerfully consider supporting these missions. What Joe is doing is so important. What PJTN is doing is so important. We have to educate and activate more Jews, Christians, and people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.